Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now, here's your host, Roxanne Derhodge.
Hi everyone, it's Roxanne Derhodge. Thanks for tuning in again. Today I have a colleague, Sarah McVanel. Sarah, how are you today?
I am awesome to be on the phone with you, but I will admit I have a cold. So I sound very on target with my brand, Frog, Forever Recognize Others' Greatness. I sound like a stuffed up frog right now. So other than a little cold, I am awesome.
Well, you look amazing.
Thank you.
So Sarah and I have been colleagues for a couple of years now. She's the president of the Toronto chapter of the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, which I'm a member, and Sarah's been a member now for, goodness, it's been about
4 years.
4 years. And
Yeah.
for me, it's just heading into my second year, and we've shared some time with various mastermind groups and things like that. And I have the privilege of seeing her once a month at our events. So Sarah's done something. She's done a lot of fantastic things since I met her. But she's recently done, it's her fourth book, and she's just published, which is, I've been seeing all over social, and I thought, what an opportunity to talk about failure. So the name of the book is called The Flip Side of Failing: How to Recognize and Leverage Greatness in Work and Life. And I know all of us, I know me for sure, I'm always trying to figure out kind of the combination and how to, when I failed at something at home, kind of how to make it better the next time, or at work. I mean, for most of us, I know if we've kind of been around for a little bit, we failed often. And I know in my career of 30 years of being in the psychology field and now in the speaking world, I failed a lot. So Sarah, thank you so much for coming on, and
My pleasure.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you. It's funny how you write the book that you need to read yourself. I don't know, Roxanne, if you've found that, because you're a published author. This book never was going to be about failure. This is a hilarious thing. I'm writing a book on failure, and I'm actually a recognition expert. So it seems completely counterintuitive. But actually, the book I was trying to write was about greatness. So I went out and I interviewed all these great Canadians, many of which you know and adore you, Roxy. People like Orlando Bowen, who's an ex-CFL player and an incredible speaker, Vince Percenti, a world record holder, Heather Moyse, bobsledder, Olympic bobsledder, gold medalist, Alan Mallory, Everest climber. I've got 3M scholars, people also who are like, quote, you and me, who have experienced traumas, who have come back from that, incredible challenges. And I wanted to basically write a book where each chapter was talking about greatness, another theme on greatness. And it was the most boring book. Roxy, you would not have wanted to read that book. I tried to write it twice and failed. So then, of course, you think, okay, well, obviously, I either have to get rid of this and then disappoint all these people that I've interviewed and all the wonderful interns that I work with who help me in interviewing these folks and transcriptions and all of that. And I never give up, as you know, I'm very persistent. So I thought there must be a different book in here. And that was when the most obvious thing just sat there right there at the front of the stack, and the number one theme, in fact, the only one that every single one of those individuals, these great Canadians that I put on a pedestal, only thing that they said was they all strove to fail. And failure was, in fact, the reason why they became great, why they were 3M scholars in the most unlikely of times and perhaps unpopular research fields. And the only way that you can ever get an Olympic medal is if you're constantly pushing past your physical and mental limitations. And it just made so much sense. And I thought, okay, this actually is a deeper message about recognition, because if we can recognize ourselves and others despite failure, now that is truly authentic recognition. That now is unconditional recognition. And this is where I love the work that you do. this is where we truly have meaningful human connection.
So I'm going to assume when you're kind of trying twice, I listen to you because I've written a book and I know what it takes to
Yes.
write a book, right? You kind of go to two iterations, and then you're thinking, this isn't right. It's not working.
Yes.
There had to be a part of you that's saying, that, quote unquote, I failed here.
Yes.
And then you're looking at it and you're thinking, here's the pebble in the rough here. Like, as you're reading all these phenomenal stories of some of these people that I've had the privilege now of spending great time with, who are fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Was it like you're kind of sitting there and looking, wow, here it is?
Yes. That's exactly what it is. It's sometimes the most obvious things are the things that you can't see or that you avoid. And I did not like the idea of writing a book about failure. I did not like the idea as a professional speaker as well. I did not like the idea of standing in front of audiences talking about failure. I might actually have to admit my own failures if I am to be so bold as to talk about other people's failures. I can't just hide behind sharing great Canadian stories. And then when, I face the reality that I have to give up, in actual fact, that felt like a bigger failure, because I'd be not only letting those individuals down that have worked hard on the book, as well as that I took their precious time. I mean, people like Peter Mansbridge that interviews world leaders who he's recently retired from the CBC, Canadian Broadcast Company. However, he normally interviews the Obamas and the Clintons and the, Trudeaus of the world. He gave me an hour of his time. I cannot let him down and all the other people, not to mention the fact that if we don't talk about failure, so the very reason why I resisted it, and I mean, I'm sure you studied Carl Jung just extensively. He said, what you resist persists. It persisted for a reason. And the best keynote now, the one that people love and they get so much value out of, that people come up to me afterward with tears streaming down their face saying, okay, this showed up in my world for a reason, is this keynote. And yes, I talk about my biggest failure, a failure as a mom, and how by the tail end of that speech, I talk about how we came back from that, and it ended up being the best thing that happened to us in our individual lives, but also as a family, and how it would led to the best career I could ever have imagined, and never would have done that had it not been for this catastrophic failure I experienced in my life. And so I just, that is what gave me the fortitude to keep writing and to write the book that I resisted and didn't want to write. But that was, as you say, just sitting right there, as plain as the nose on my face.
So would you mind sharing a little bit of that story? I've heard it I've heard snippets of it. I've not heard all of it from our time together. I think it's a fascinating story. If you would be.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. About 5 years ago, I was working in a corporate job, maybe even 6 years ago now. I was a senior leader in a hospital. I'd worked very hard to climb the corporate ladder, had a master's degree, had done many certifications, even while we were raising small children, kept going back to school and getting additional qualifications. And now I had reached the second highest position in the organization, along with, of course, a peer group. And I was 38. I mean, isn't this what we're all supposed to do? Is make the most of our education and get good paychecks and have fancy titles on LinkedIn. And on the surface, everything looks great, because we have a couple of cars, we have a couple of homes, and we have two beautiful children. And I came home from work one day, having worked late yet again, because I often miss dinner at this point in my life, and I go to work so early that I even don't get a chance to have breakfast with my family either. And my husband says to me as I walk in the door, could you go up and talk to Justin, who is our 10-year-old son? And so I don't even get a chance to say hello to my 8-year-old daughter or to give him a kiss. I go right upstairs, because I'm mommy therapist. Because like you, Roxanne, my background is therapy. That's my master's. And I figure, hey, I mediate, coach all day long. No problem. I'll get this fixed up in 10 minutes and be back downstairs to wolf down some dinner and get routine restored, get the bath time done, and then probably hop back on my emails to, catch up on the things that I had left as I was skiving as I was driving home. And as I walked in the door, I just could feel something was wrong. I didn't know what it was. I could just feel it. That feeling with a loved one. I'm sure you and all the listeners have had that feeling. And it's dark. My son, who's ADHD, normally is a whirling dervish at this time of the night. He's sitting in the corner staring at the wall. And as I walk down, I sit down beside him. And the light is streaming in from the spotlight, the street lamp outside. As I say to him, bad day at school today, bud. And he says, yeah, it was a bad bullying day today, Mom. And as he's saying it, I actually look down at his arm and I noticed there are cut marks up and down his arm, intentional cuts. And it all begins to make sense why my child, who is on antidepressants, anti-anxiety, anti-tic medication, even though he doesn't have Tourette's, he is clearly being bullied, and I had no idea. And in that moment, this feeling of complete failure as a mother washes over me. And all of the work that we're seeing coming out of Brene Brown's lab shows us about how there are two things that cause shame in women more than anything else. Number one, body image, and number two, motherhood. Whether you're a mom or not, apparently nobody's averse to it, which is just so wonderful. Shame is an equal opportunity employer. And I just felt awful. I just thought, like, how could I miss this? How could I be so busy climbing that ladder that I didn't even notice what was going on with the most important people in my life? And it also then spirals the shame cycle of, well, what have I missed in my daughter? And what have I missed in my husband and my parents? And, so my son asked me alone. I go downstairs. I tell my husband, now he has his own shame cycle. He's a teacher. How did I miss this? I'm his dad. I've been with him for hours. How come he didn't say anything? And for men, their biggest triggers for shame is masculinity and being a provider. And he feels like, I haven't provided. I haven't protected my child. How could I have missed this? And we hit a really dark place. And I've had a lot of failures in my life, but this is definitely the biggest one, because in that moment, Roxanne, I thought, I don't know if my kid's going to live through this. Mm-hmm. He's talking about wishing he wasn't alive. Mm-hmm. And when I had hugged him upstairs and I said, everything's going to be okay. We're going to fix this. I promise you. And you're a good kid. And don't let those kids tell you that you're not worth it and that you're not a good person. I could tell when he looked at me, he did not believe this time that I could fix it. And he didn't believe that he was worth it. And that in that moment, we didn't know how to fix it. And we started to do things like we recognized each other a lot more. All the things that I teach people in a corporate environment around recognition, we actually practiced in our household. And that helped. But the environment, the context was actually setting him up for failure as well. The school, the before and after school daycare. And I'm not down on schools because my husband's a teacher. I love schools. It's just that particular school was not willing to face it and to do what they needed to do. So we realized that as much as we could make things better in our household, he was being bullied in every area except at our house and a few houses, of close friends, but he didn't really even truly have close friends. So we needed to start again. So we quit our life. Basically, we sold everything but our cars, needed those. And we kept the kids because we were pretty attached and we moved and we got out of debt and we moved back to Niagara on the Lake, or Niagara Lake District, Niagara Lake area, because that's where my family is. And that's where I'm originally from. Of course, wonderful people like you live here. So it's a great place to be. And, we started again, and I started a business, not having the foggiest clue what to do at all, because I've never, you don't learn business when you're in psychology school, and just told everybody that I knew that I liked, hey, guess what? I work for myself now. You want any work done? That was the extent of my business model. That was it. I just told people I'm open for business. And in that first year, I just broke even, but I did everything that I possibly could. Most importantly, though, it didn't matter that I just broke even, because we set ourselves up that was okay. We could live off of just my husband's income because we didn't have a mortgage and car payments and things like that. And, but my son got well. He got well so quickly. And within 6 months, he has friends for the first time. He's in a safe school that really loves him and sees his strengths. And, it's not perfect. It's not easy for him. He's a lot of challenges, but you know what? they could see his greatness, and they didn't just see his just challenges. My kids got into competitive sports that we never had the time or energy to get them to and from, and they started to just thrive in those environments. He got off antidepressants, anti-anxieties, no more tics. And he's just now, years later, he's a competitive rower, and if he wants to, he probably could one day make a national team if that becomes something he wants. He's got wonderful relationships with not just friends, but also this choice in romantic relationships are very respectful and compassionate. I mean, we spend so much time with his girlfriend, and she's just total delight. And it's been the best thing for me as well, because I didn't realize that I actually didn't enjoy most of what I was doing in my job. And I love almost everything I do in my business. The almost everything part is, receipts and tracking mileage and taxes and
all that fun stuff.
All that fun business, running your business stuff. But no, I mean, truly every day I feel so blessed. And, my son, in fact, all of us have said at various points, and we will say this often, wow, if it hadn't have been for that crisis, family crisis we have had, we wouldn't be here, and how lucky we are. I mean, we live on the water, a beautiful place in Niagara, and we love our home, and we love the freedom that we have now, financial freedom, and just, life freedom. We're just better people too because of this as well. And I don't mean to paint life as a Pollyanna. We're raising teenagers. It's not like we never have disputes or like life isn't easy. I'm not trying to paint a picture like that. It's just, I never ever would have thought that our biggest failure would lead to actually our biggest success.
Wow. So when you kind of think of like your story, and you've all these phenomenal, people, that have done phenomenal things in our history in Canada, what are some of the things that you picked up from them that thematically that you could share about failing, and that I think I'm interested in, I'm sure the people listening are also interested.
Yeah. For sure. One of the biggest themes that I realized when I was actually creating the keynote version, so this was after the book was produced, is that how they handle failure is actually how they handle everything in work and life. So, for example, Peter Mansbridge doesn't have a university education, and you would think, my gosh, if you would never know, right? No, he decided when he was in high school that he wanted to travel. So he told his parents, who always talk current events, always told their children, you're going to go to university, you're going to become big things, and, become doctors, lawyers, judges, whatever, whatever you want to do, as long as it's an esteemed profession. And he told them, no, I want to travel. And then he ended up joining the Navy. And when he came back to Canada, he was working in an airport, doing basically anything that needed doing. And he said, okay, when somebody had called in sick, okay, I'll do the announcements, no problem. And he started doing the announcements, and just a perfect stranger waiting for a flight came up to him and said, I've been listening to you, and you have a great voice. You should be on radio. And just in that moment, he went, oh, yes, I should be in broadcasting. So that set his path. He just, next day in his coveralls with his name on the lapel, he went up to the front desk of the local CBC radio station and said, hi, I'm Peter Mansbridge, and I'm going to be a broadcaster. Can you imagine the look on the receptionist's face? And they talked to him, and they thought, sure, we'll give this guy a chance. And as he climbed his career in journalism, he was the first one to say, the door slammed in my face way more times than it opened. You don't have the education, you don't have the pedigree, you don't have the connections, you've gone as far as you can. Every time you wanted to go to a bigger city or made the leap from radio to TV, and then from being an international correspondent to having a regular spot, that was multiple failures, multiple failed attempts, multiple rejections before those things ever happened. He just believed that I have to believe in my dream and myself more than other people, because I'm the one who knows myself. I know what is possible for me. So how you handle failure is how you handle everything. that he doesn't take no for an answer. So you can probably imagine why he's had some pretty darn tough but fabulous interviews with 13,000 people, and why he's covered every royal wedding or funeral, every major, natural disaster, elections for decades, and has been a trusted journalist. So he's one of many people that really lives that, how you handle failures, how you handle everything. Your rejection is not the story. It's the pushing past it and through it that is the true story of your success. Another theme that came up, which ended up being a part of a model that I created, was your resiliency comes from your failures. So it's not that you have to become resilient to failure. It's that actually your failures can build your resiliency. So the model that I created in the book is how ACCEPT is the acronym. So how we can accept failure, because and you alluded to this earlier, that we all fail. We all have challenges. We all have failures. It's not if you have a failure, an obstacle, roadblock, a challenge. It's how you handle it when it happens. And I'll give you, for the show notes, the link for if folks want to download this chart. But in essence, being failure resilient, and when you accept failure, A is acquire, where people would ask themselves things like, what can I learn? So what can I acquire from this? The first C is choice. What options are available? People who are not resistant to failure consider it, there must be another option. There must be another possibility, as opposed to it limiting their choices. They don't externalize their power. They internalize their options. The next C is connection. So how can this bond or unite? And that's the fascinating thing, is these people that I initially put on a pedestal, as soon as I looked at it through the lens of failure, I realized that they're just like you and I. And I invite the reader or the listener, in fact, to think about how the people that they most respect and role model, or they're the role models in their life, it's actually probably their failures that have made them more accessible to them, and that they respect them even more because of, or despite their failures, or the obstacles, not because, not respect them less because there's been a failure. The E is expect. How could this be expected? As opposed to seeing it as this fearful thing, it is, well, failures happen. So how do I bounce back from it? How do I process this? P is progress. What's the best way forward? So it's not necessarily always the outcome, getting right to the outcome, because that's often how we, in this society, this perfectionistic society that we live in, it has to be, I have to be at the top. I have to have the top job. I have to get there faster than everybody. 40 under 40 is, oh, great. I'm 41. So great. Now I'm washed up. No, it's just, you still make progress in your business. That's what's most important. And then T, transformation, is what is important on the long term. So folks don't necessarily get caught up in how this is it for me. It's that this must be here for a reason. We have this expression in the speaking profession, your mess is your message. So how is, in fact, this failure, this obstacle, this roadblock, this setback, how could it actually have shown up for a reason? And could things be better as a result? So those are a few of the themes. I could go on, Rosie or Roxy, but I just don't, I don't want to take up all the airtime. What other questions do you have?
Well, I'm just thinking, right? So from a leadership perspective, or when you're running teams, right, or managers, or, there's always the diversity of how people deal with failure.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So if you think in a work environment, from that perspective, what kind of, words of wisdom would you give to people that manage others, right? Because I think about, some of the teams that I've managed over my career, and I literally think I had one team that I managed and there was 10 personalities, without a doubt, right? There was nothing that I could do with one that I didn't do with another, and I had to learn each person and then kind of sing their song based on what they were needing at that time and all those things. So what kind of things, and you've been obviously back in this whole concept of failure for, however long you've been working on this book. What would you say to people that are having to manage people that deal with failure in different ways?
Well, first of all, I just want to say how lucky people are to have worked for you, that you were willing to honor them for who they are. It's really easy as leaders to fall into the traps of the millennials and the boomers and, all these sort of, um, uh, or veteran workers, experienced workers versus newer. It's really easy to categorize and pigeonhole people, and you didn't do that. So I just really want to honor and acknowledge that, because that's part of how you handle failure is how you handle everything, right? So it's the same with leadership. How you handle failure in leadership is how you handle everything. And I think new leaders learn pretty quickly that if you try to manage everybody the same way, particularly since that way is probably the way you want to be managed, which it may not be the way everybody wants to be managed.
Right.
So, I mean, that's part of it, is actually you just role model that by how you described how the way you've led. So that's one thing, is to just recognize that everybody's different, and that will help you with how to handle failure with people as well as everything else in leadership. I think the other part is that if we expect as leaders that people are not going to get it all right, sometimes a deadline will be missed, sometimes we'll have higher sick time than we expect. And I'm not saying accept it as in, don't hold people accountable or yourself accountable or address it. It's just, if we dramatize or we traumatize these things that naturally happen in workplaces, then it's a problem as opposed to we look for solutions. So if we expect that there are going to be blips as a leader, if we expect that we'll have to address issues, then maybe we're not going to be so resistant, and that we can be resilient. That framework, the accept model, applies to leaders as well. I think I would do what you had role modeled as well, is admit, this was part of what you did earlier in our podcast. I don't even know if you noticed it. You're so transparent and such a wonderful quality. I just really want to make it very transparent to people. You admitted that you have made many failures in your business and in your career. We need to be honest as leaders with people. You know what? It took me 2 years to get the job. So don't think that just because it's week 3 that you should have had it nailed by now. I was in the same situation as you. I mean, imagine the weight off of a new person's shoulders if you said that versus, oh, I'm just going to reiterate the expectation. Start with humanizing it. Let's put the human factor back in the workplace and say, you know what? It's normal to not get it right first time. It's normal that it's going to be overwhelming. And so, share your struggles, or if you're going through something rough at home, you don't have to hide it from your colleagues. It's amazing how when I gave my notice, I gave 5 months notice when our whole situation happened in our family. And people said to me, wow, Sarah, I never would have imagined that you were going through this. Because it was about 6 months of us cleaning up our life and getting things in order before I could finally give my notice. And I realized, in hindsight, imagine if I had just been honest with my colleagues and said, we are having the biggest crisis of our family's life right now. And I'm not going to be performing at my best, or I'm not going to get all my deadlines in time, or I need a bit of help. Imagine how much better that would have been, because I wore the burden of being a bad mom, but also having to be an exceptional performer at work at the same time. So being a leader, a great leader who leverages failure in its full capacity, is also acknowledging your own failures, struggles, challenges, obstacles, where you're not naturally good at something, where, we're saying to somebody on the team, wow, you sure have an ability to create organized systems so fast. I would love to have been gifted with that. Or you have just such a natural way of being able to connect with your colleagues. I can't believe how in a month that you have been here, you've created such strong friendships and relationships already. It took me a year to earn people's trust. That's amazing. That relates to what I normally teach in my corporate environment, which is around recognition, is that recognize people for their strengths and juxtapose it with how you may not be gifted in that. That in and of itself is a gift, to acknowledge how not only are they great at something, that you're not necessarily that perfect at it as well. So, these are, I think, so much of, and the model in the book is, we have to have a failure resilient mindset, which is the accept part of the formula. And then we have to have a failure resilient context. So leaders who are listening, ask yourself, do I surround myself with people who allow me to fail sometimes? Does my boss, do my peers, do the members of my team realize that I don't have to get it right every time? And that's still okay. And that we want to learn from it. We want to figure out how to make it better. I'm not let off the hook and never held accountable. It's not that I don't know what is expected of me and those sorts of challenges, but it truly is, I don't have to be perfect. I'm not a machine, you know. And similarly, do I hold my folks accountable? And yet I also have a very strong relationship with them in that they could come to me and talk about struggles. They can ask for help. They can, they will want to participate in continuous improvement because they are not afraid to point out when systems aren't working. Every organization, yours, mine, GM, like massive companies, the government of Canada, every single company, every team, there are some systems that aren't working. Do people bring those to your attention? Do you ask people? Do you celebrate the oops? Do you have something like a biggest oops award where you celebrate the biggest problem that somebody's found? Like, yes, we almost lost a client and we didn't this time, but okay, what almost made us lose that client? How can we fix that? And as opposed to what normally happens in workplaces is that people are afraid to admit it. They shame, they blame, they hide it, or people feel shame, blame, and that it's a bad mark on them. So given that how failure resistant we are as a culture, we have to create safety, psychological safety, and we have 13 factors of psychological safety in the workplace now. And every one of them, I would argue, you need to have a failure resilient context in order to have true psychological safety. And that's the tail end of this model, is when people will have three options when a failure, an obstacle, challenge hits. They can deflate, they can just mitigate the damage, or they can elevate. As a leader, I believe truly one of your true tests, and I know your brand is authentic leadership. To me, when it comes to failure, authentic leadership is that people can elevate from failure. They do not stay in that stuck place. They do not hide it. We do not argue for status quo, and we certainly don't go backwards. We look at the best of what is, the best of what's been, and the best of what could be, and we move forward from there without judgment or harshness, and yet with balance with accountability. And so that, we can truly accelerate and shine in our teams and in our organizations.
That makes me think, when I was an executive in health and wellness, and I would manage about 50 companies, there was about, I would say, maybe 25% of my portfolio at that time. I had contacts that were, if I were to do a personality inventory on them, they were diametrically, whatever my major trait was, and my one that I needed to work on, those were the ones that kept me up at night, because they were very meticulous with details. So I'm a big picture thinker. I'm a visionary. I'm not so good with the microscopic. So I managed a lot of those companies for 10 years, Sarah. I would sweat bullets going into those meetings. I would over prepare because those people thought so differently from me, because, everything would, get it prepared for me. The statisticians would give me the information. I would get the marketing to give me the information. My assistant would, and I would, the night before those meetings, I would go over it and over it, because what used to happen is I would go in and I wasn't meeting their need. So it forced me to learn their language and what was needed for them to get what they needed about their health and wellness strategy. And initially I would say, well, this doesn't feel right. How am I going to do better? And now I look back at that particular tenure in my life, and that was my biggest growth, because I knew when I went into those board meetings, I would get sliced and diced, quite literally, at the beginning. Yes. But then, what it forced me to do is to think is, okay, I know how I want the information, but what is it that they need from me? And it really helped me to grow through that failure. So, it just makes so much sense when you talk about looking at it from the different perspectives versus everybody going along with what they think you want to hear as a leader.
Right. Oh, and if there's one thing that when I speak with CEOs and business owners, that is the thing that keeps them up at night. What are people not telling me?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you have a failure resilient context, people aren't afraid to tell you things. I mean, I was a bit of a rarity probably in the last organization that I worked in, where I would tell the CEO things that he didn't want to hear. And I'd say, this may be a career limiting move. Do you want to hear it? And that was kind of our way of me saying, you're probably not going to want to hear this. And if you were a different type of person, you probably would fire me by telling you, because you really don't want to hear it. But I think he considered me a trusted advisor, and we're still colleagues to this day. We could call each other up and be honest and transparent about anything, even though we don't work together anymore. So, honesty, I believe, is a true element of what we're talking about here. And how honest are we right now in organizations? Are we truly, the whole difficult conversations movement arose really out of people repressing, hiding, pushing down the stories they have about people, the things that have been unsaid, the hurts, the blame, the criticism, the toxicity as well. There would not be a multi-million-dollar industry on how to have crucial conversations if people had failure resiliency in their workplaces.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you were talking, Roxy, about your portfolio, I definitely agree that the things that aren't easy for us and we face head on and we think, okay, this is a growth opportunity. 100% agree that those are things that can be career defining and character building moments in our career. And I think we need to balance that with honoring and respecting the people who work for us enough that when I realize I've got Roxy, who's big picture, not detail oriented, and I've got Jenna, who's very detail oriented and specific and very black and white, instead of organizing my leadership team geographically, I think it might best serve them and my clients to organize them by fit. I mean, we don't hire people because they're the physically closest person who lives to the building. We're supposedly hire people based on fit. So why wouldn't we organize our teams that way too? Mm-hmm. And I can tell you in my career, some of the best choices I ever made in my leadership were about reorganizing the portfolios, people's responsibilities, the priorities of our work based on the people in the role that I have on my team right now. And obviously working with the clients about what their biggest needs were, as opposed to saying, no, we have to do this program and the person in this role is always offered that program, you need to do it. So I think that it's a balance of, we want to push and encourage growth as much as possible, with knowing that there is naturally going to be there's going to be a limitation. It's just like Heather Moyse became an Olympic bobsledder, not just because she was failure resilient and was willing to not always succeed. Her first Olympics, she didn't actually medal. And had she only believed that a medal was success, she probably wouldn't have gone back. And with the failure resiliency, she also was an extremely talented athlete. Mm-hmm. She was an amazing track star. With great coaching and an incredible gene pool. All of her brother and her sister and her parents, you can just tell by looking at them, these are very fit people. Then she was on the national rugby team, so wow. I think, and that was where she was recruited into the sledding, her sledding team for Canada. She had natural talent that then she further honed and then had the mindset, failure resilient mindset. So it is, for the leaders listening to this podcast, I really, really encourage you to honor and look at your people as individuals, just like you did, Roxy, and say, how am I going to get the very best from them? And then how am I going to support them when they are positioned to do their very best and they still do not succeed because of what's going on in their personal life, because this has been a huge growth, because they're overwhelmed, because we have put so much work on people's plates these days. how do we support them despite that? That's, I think, where we truly get the best from people. It's that combination there.
And I think that's a sweet spot, right? I think, but to your point, the vulnerability as a leader to recognize what are my strengths, what are my limitations, how do I view the world, and how is it different for Jim, Jane, John, and then kind of trying to think of collaboratively, not to just think tactically,
Yes.
but to think, about what is it that Roxanne feels is good at, but needs help with, is competent at, doesn't have the skill. How does she need to experience it? And that takes a lot of, like you said, that's connection and getting to know people. And sometimes you're going to do it badly. Like, I like the Oops Award. I think that's phenomenal, because we always talk about what are the wins and how did we do, what did we do well? But I think you're equally as right as saying, what did we not do well? What could we have learned? What variables did we not take into consideration? And what things were outside of our control?
Yeah. And here's another question to add to that list. Love those questions. Why aren't things worse? So it's a version of the what's working around here, but also it's that when we're acknowledging that something is not working, and yet it's not as bad as it could be. So there's this beautiful whole conversation that can happen in a failure resilient team or organization that allows you to explore things on a much deeper level. My background is healthcare, and we had to legislate quality reviews in order for healthcare teams, when there was a critical incident, to analyze it so thoroughly and deeply. Why? Because it's a litigious industry. People don't want to get sued. I can't admit I made a mistake because I may be blamed. People feel like there's so much on the line. I couldn't possibly admit a mistake because then everybody will judge me, will think that I'm a terrible clinician, and there goes my career down the toilet. Maybe we overwhelm our busy middle managers in healthcare. Some have up to 250 direct reports. Mm-hmm. So now we may have to surface the fact that we've put completely unreasonable expectations on folks, and yet we have no additional money to pay them in our strained healthcare system. So, but we had to legislate, you must do a root cause analysis. If there is a near miss that's very serious, that somebody has had a medication or a surgical or whatever the issue, whatever the type of intervention, but that person had serious consequences as a result of it, or perhaps even lost their lives. Mm-hmm. It may be shocking for some Canadians to hear, and believe me, have good faith in your healthcare system. It is a great healthcare system. And the reality is, nobody wants to admit that they were part of a system that created a tragic circumstance, because nobody shows up to do a bad job. And yet sometimes we have to legislate, you must admit failure. You must study failure, because how on earth are we going to prevent it from happening again?
For sure. You and I probably could spend so much more time. And I love that the term failure resilience. And I hope you coin that, and because I love it. And I think
go for it. Use it. Everyone listening, use it.
Honestly, I love it, because I think if we can teach that in our everyday lives, either at home or at work, that's the gift.
Yeah. Well, we're experiencing that in our house right now. My daughter just graduated grade 8, and she came within less than 1% away from the honors roll, in a very high performing caliber of students. And initially she felt terrible. And when you're 14 and you're a girl, it's a very angst related time in your life. We've had to live this lesson this week, is really honoring that she is brilliant and smart, and 0.7% or 5% or whatever, that tiny fraction, less than 1%, does not make you smart or not smart. So that is part. We've had a lot of failure resiliency conversations in our house, not because anyone views her as a failure in this house except her, and that she gets a chance to redefine what her grade 8 year has been, and how she's ended her elementary career. And she's getting to that point now. It's taken a week. She's very proud. She works so hard. She's she's and I'll admit it's been a bit of a battle for me of speaking with the school and them not being willing to consider that less than 1% is close enough that we can't give her at least the ability to say that she graduated with honors. But I have to move on from it. I don't really care about it as a mom. Like, I don't feel that she needs to get that to prove to me she's an incredibly talented, smart girl. But it matters to her, which was why we kind of took this on even as a conversation with the school. And so she gets to now redefine, what does intelligent look like? What does smart? What does working hard look like? What do I need to do in high school? If this now is such a big goal of hers, what does she have to do in high school to be an honor roll kid all the way through? So it's been a struggle for a week related to that, while we have colds and while we have, like, we're overscheduled and, all the things that happen at the end of the year. But it's been a good thing. And this is, I think, the gift of when we look at failure resiliency versus being failure resistant, is that we always have an opportunity to discover, to uncover, and that's the flip. That is the flip side of failure, is that there is another way if we choose to see it, experience it. And I just want to make sure everybody hears me loud and clear when I say, and you don't have to do it immediately. Being failure resilient does not mean you go, oh, thank goodness this failure's happened. I'm so excited I get a chance to learn. No, if you lose somebody you love, if you lost your job, if you if somebody hacks your computer and you lose everything, you don't have to be like, this is amazing, I get to learn something now. No, you're allowed to feel, this is the worst, this is awful, I can't believe this happened. The elevate can happen with time. It's okay to deflate at first, or just mitigate the damage.
Right.
The deflate can happen. And that, in fact, is part of being failure resilient as well, is to just be able to go, okay, this really does stink. And that is okay to feel that way. It is okay to say, team, I need space. My kid yelled at me before I came to work. I am not in a good mood. I just need 5 minutes before our team meeting. Sorry, we're starting late, but or you guys go ahead without me. I'm in the bathroom crying for 5 minutes. So, failure resiliency is however you need it to be able to flip it for yourself.
Well, Sarah, this is always a pleasure. I know this is the second time you've been on my podcast. What I want you to tell everyone is where they can buy the book, or any employers that are looking for speaking events, whatever you're needing. Just let them know where they can get a hold of you, so they can spend some time with you if they're needing.
Awesome. Well, Roxy, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's an honor and a privilege too. So my website is greatnessmagnified.com. And if anyone would like those tools or to learn more about the book, you can go to greatnessmagnified.com/theflipsideoffailing. You can also just Google it. It's available on Kindle, on Kobo. You can buy it through Amazon. Of course, you can buy it through my website. Buy it through the website. Just tell me if you want me to autograph it. Happy to. It's this new demo video coming out. So if people want to check that out, we have people dance in the keynote. We really put our money where our mouth is when we talk about learning. So, and don't worry, everybody, it's not scary. It's really, really fun. I have smiling audiences in my new demo video that's coming out.
She does, and she dances.
Yes, I do dance.
She does dance, and she's funny.
Oh, thank you.
So for everyone, Sarah, always a pleasure, and for everyone listening, I'm going to end it on this note to say, failure resilience. Just keep trying it and figuring out what you did wrong and what you could learn from the experience, and how do you elevate from that spot according to her model. For everyone, if you're needing more on me, I'm a keynote speaker and a mental health and wellness specialist. You can reach me at roxannedurhodge.com. So take care, Sarah. We'll chat soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannedurhodge.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time. on Authentic Living with Roxanne.